Okay. So thank you all for coming. This is such a tremendous opportunity, I think, for us to fellowship with one another, to learn, to grow. I was telling Rabbi earlier, I love putting together studies like this because I learn just as much as all of you. And God is never done working on us. We grow spiritually, we grow in every capacity. And I love going through the Word. I love teaching the Scriptures, and I'm glad that all of you are able to benefit from this. This began as a one-part class, but now you see part one because it was impossible for me to put this all into one class. And I'll have the 4 bullet points associated with class number 2 on the last slide because this will be a two-parter. We'll address the Jerusalem Council, the concept of inclusion, the olive tree, and also Paul's Rav Shaul's cycle of restoration, as far as the mystery of the Gentiles, the nations coming in, and also the restoration of Israel, life from the dead. So that will all be a part of the class number 2. And I want to open up with a word of prayer actually first. Abba, we thank you for this gathering, for this time together. I thank you for your goodness, your mercy, your compassion that knows no bounds, though we have done nothing to deserve your mercy. Still, we sit here redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, by the blood of Yeshua. We thank you, Abba, for giving us your one, your only Son, and for opening up our eyes to the salvation that comes through him alone. We pray for the nation of Israel, the Jewish people the world over, that you would open up the eyes and bring forth life from the dead. And I pray that all of us, regardless of our ethnicity, would understand this calling, would own it, and walk hand in hand with our brethren the world over. In Yeshua's name, amen. So I want to start off by talking about briefly the Commonwealth of Israel. So the Commonwealth of Israel, we talk about the one new man concept, which will be for the most part associated with class number 2. We're talking about one people with 2 distinct groups, okay? So Rav Shaul, Rabbi Paul, speaks to the former pagans at Ephesus, and this is Ephesians chapter 2, verse 12. At that time, you were separate from Messiah, excluded from the Commonwealth of Israel, and strangers. Now, I embolden strangers, or try to hang on to that word. That'll be a running principle throughout this text, or the class, to the covenants of the promise, having no hope and without God in the world. So we're talking about a very large portion of the known world at that time had no hope for the hundreds of years leading up to this. And now all of a sudden, the nations have a distinct hope. Okay, we understand this hope in the context of Ephesians. He's talking about the salvation through Yeshua, the Messiah. But where did Yeshua come from? What was the origination of this hope? So this is going to be part and parcel what we connect on during this class. Again, Rav Shaul, Galatians 3:28 and 29 says, to the former pagans of Galatia, there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Messiah Yeshua. And if you belong to Messiah, then you are Abraham's seed, heirs according to the promise. I want to insert 2 more notes here really quick before I continue. This is all going to be available, video and audio and PowerPoint. So if you don't need to take notes, it'll all be sent to you. Just understand that. Please keep it amongst the members, because this is one of the benefits of being a member, is being a part of something like this. All of the biblical texts are coming from the TLV, by the way, as well, just for unification's sake. So Rav Shaul, again, reiterates this premise. Now he's talking about that in the scheme of salvation, and Rabbi talked about this in his message, Roots, yesterday, that when we talk about salvation from Yeshua, that God is no respecter of persons. It doesn't matter your ethnicity. It doesn't matter if you're slave or free, or if you're either female or male. Now, are there still males and females? Are there still Jews and Greeks? Are there still, at least in the context of those times, slaves and free? Of course, that is a reality. So again, another aspect of this class is identifying why the differentiation. Because the reality is that there still maintains a distinction amongst the groups. So nearly 200 times throughout Paul's letters, He references Jews and Gentiles, either separately or in combination. In the book of Romans, over 75 times, he speaks about Jews and Gentiles, or a combination of the two. So again, inferred, referred distinctions throughout the letters, using the words Jew or Greek and Gentile nearly 200 times throughout the letters. I want to also add a caveat too. There are some people that have a problem with the word Gentile. Okay, some people believe it's a little bit demeaning. Let me share with you, nations, goyim is Hebrew for nations. Gentiles, there are times where I will use the word Gentile or goy in the context of idolatry or paganism, because oftentimes that was how it was referred to in the scriptures. But sometimes when we read the word goyim, is plural of goy, nation, nations. He's literally just talking about all of the nations of the world outside of the people in the land of Israel, okay? So it's all contextually connected. I have had people in the past say, oh, don't use the word Gentile. It's so offensive because I'm not an idol worshiper. So understand my heart in that. It's all about context, okay? So I want to go through some biblical history from the Garden of Eden on, just to sort of set the stage here. And I say unity, separation, unity, because the garden gave us the first portrayal of genuine unity between God and man before it was adulterated. And then a separation took place between God and man. And God has been working for thousands of years to restore the unity in the Garden of Eden and the fellowship that he had with Adam. Okay? So this is God's plan to save the world, according to yours truly here. So, and if you have any questions or comments, if we can try to save them towards the end, just jot them down, okay? So the story of salvation begins nearly 4,000 years prior to the days of Yeshua. It started the moment Adam and Chava is Eve. More specifically, when God had an animal killed in order to cover up the shame of their nakedness. Are you aware that the redemptive process started in the Garden of Eden? It's implied very, very subtly, but all of a sudden, out of nowhere, an animal is slaughtered. We don't know when, we don't know how, we don't know where. All of a sudden, they had the garments of an animal to cover up the shame of their nakedness, because now they were able to see things in the way that they weren't able to see them before. So the sin necessitated the shedding of blood, and that's where the skin came from. Sin immediately birthed consequences, and God immediately made a way where prior none existed. There was the necessity of substitution. The standard was set. Behavior contrary to God's requirements demanded payment, either by the one sinning or by a replacement meant to cover the sinner. And this is at the heart of the redemptive process. God has provided a way through the shedding of blood so you and I do not have to pay with our own blood. And as we sit here, I say, we sit here redeemed. And this is something that you should be so joyful about every moment of every day. And thank God the moment you wake up with breath in your lungs and you are able to go to sleep at night. Genesis chapter 3:15, the book of Breshit, God declares to the serpent that there would be enmity between it and the seed of the woman. And while the seed would be injured, it would crush the head of the serpent. The mortal blow began when the seed gave his life for all creation. And who is that seed? Yeshua descended from Abraham, and specifically with Isaac, and will be completed at the end of the age. And every Shabbat we talk about Jeremiah chapter 31. We are walking in the heart of Jeremiah 31 in the new covenant, but it will not be finalized until the end of the age, when no man will have to teach one another, for all of us will know Adonai. From the time Adam and Chava were forced to leave Gan Eden is the Garden of Eden, the plan to restore that which was lost began. The question was how and who. Who would be this agent of salvation? And who would head the drive towards not only restoration of intimate garden fellowship, but to unify creation and to facilitate what the rabbis commonly refer to as tikkun olam, which is the reparation of the world that began in the Garden of Eden. Hundreds of years would go by, and though the Torah was stamped on the heart of man at birth, he rebelled. The world was destroyed, mercifully restored, another rebellion at Babel, and people scattered, languages developed, and continents separated from each other, all with the goal of preventing mankind from succeeding in once again destroying itself. The plan to save mankind accelerates, and through Shem, Eber, from where we get Ivri, the Hebrew people, becomes the great-grandfather of Avram HaIvri, as he's known in the book of Genesis, chapter 14, verse 13. That is Abram the Hebrew. Avram, the son of the idol maker Terach, answers to the call when God says, Lech lecha, get yourself out of your house. And although he doesn't verbally say Hineni, because he said that for the first time when he was asked to give his son Yitzchak on the altar, he says Hineni with his actions, because his Hebraic biblical faith is halacha. It's a way of walking. It's an action-oriented faith. All right? Get yourself out of your father's household. And Lech Lecha is the call that God has on every single one of our lives. At one point, we all answered the call to get ourselves out, proverbially speaking, out of our father's house. All right. From him would come Yitzchak, Isaac, and from him Yaakov, named Israel, after contending with an angel at Pnei-el. And Pnei-el is the place known as the face of God. So now we have the development of the nation, of the people of Israel. God's plan to save the world, one people to save them all, or at least through them. So the word Israel, and we're going to be going through a lot of Hebrew in this class, so if you want to take notes, that's fine. The nation of Israel, as far as the name is concerned, means several things, with primary being soldier of God. Its etymology, and etymology is basically just the study, the development of how words developed into other words or names into other names. The etymology of Israel comes from the word sarita, where he says that you have striven, you have wrestled with God, and you have been successful. You have wrestled with God. So sarita is the Hebrew word for wrestling, for fighting. Comes from sarah, to command or to set in order. And it's the cousin of the word Sar Shalom, Prince of Peace. Okay? So while he is also known as a soldier of God, one who wrestles with God, it's also known as the Prince of God. Sar of God, El. Okay? So Sarah, Prince comes from Sarah, meaning to rule or to govern, hence the word Prince. So again, that's the breakdown of the name development that led to the word Yisrael. Jacob and his descendants make their way into Egypt, where they develop into a mighty people within Goshen and beyond. Egypt offered many things, including idolatry. Adonai recounts this to the prophet Ezekiel, and this is Ezekiel chapter 27 and 8. Adonai laments this through Ezekiel to the dispersed community in Babylon at that time. I said to them, each of you must throw away every detestable thing from his eyes and not defile yourselves with the idols of Egypt. You see, Adonai never forgets anything. Hundreds of years later, he has the prophet speak to those dispersed in Babylon about what their fathers did in Egypt. I am Adonai your God, but they rebelled against me and were unwilling to listen to me. None of them cast away the detestable things that were before their eyes, nor did they forsake the idols of Egypt. So I resolved to pour out my fury upon them, to expend my anger upon them where? In the midst of the land of Egypt. So I briefly mentioned this during Totally Tasty Torah yesterday. The nation of Israel, it was not because of their holiness that they were redeemed in the land of Egypt. It was because of the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see, just like we see today in the diaspora, because the nation of Egypt prophetically represented the nations of the world at that time, we see idolatry through and through in the midst of all of these lands. and the Jewish people are not immune to that idolatry. So God was getting ready to destroy the Jewish people in Egypt before he even redeemed them and brought them out into the wilderness. That's how immersed Israel was for over 400 years in the land of Egypt in Egyptian idolatry. And that Egypt had many, many gods at that time. All right, as Pharaoh, a Pharaoh who does not know Yosef then rises to power, viewing Israel's descendants as an internal threat. The people were enslaved, continued to grow, and, quote, groaned because of their slavery. They cried out, and their cry from slavery went up to God. God heard their sobbing and remembered his covenant with Abraham, Yitzchak, and with Yaakov. God saw Bnei Israel. He was concerned about them. The compassion of God and mindfulness of his prophetic promises to the fathers would soon redefine the enslaved people as what we call Am Segula. This is a very important term for you to come to an understanding of, because it begins to form a foundation for how the nations would relate to the Jewish people. Am Segula is a chosen people, more specifically a treasured people, and that's Exodus 19:5b. So Skula is property or wealth, private property, often used of the people of Israel. So the nation of Israel, the Jewish people the world over from this time until today, are a treasure that only God owns. They are his chosen people. They are his property and his wealth. No one can own the nation of Israel. They belong, they are property of the living God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the understanding of Segula. They would also be known as a Goy Kadosh, a holy nation. Earlier, I was talking about the context of the word Goy. The first time we see the word Goy in all of the Tanakh, it refers to the nation of Israel. They were a holy nation. They weren't Gentiles. They were just contextually a nation at this time. All right? So Israel's role and responsibilities to the nation. So let's get a 5-point breakdown of what the nation of Israel was called to as far as a representative to the rest of the world. So to be a blessing to the nations. This relates to both the destined seed of the woman that we know of as Yeshua, through whom the nations would enter into God's promises, and to the physical Jewish people. Israel exists not for itself alone, but as God's extended family of blessing to all of humanity. A nation of priests, a kingdom of priests. At Sinai, Israel is given a universal mediating role. This is very important for us to understand. As a Kohen, as a priest, comes from the Hebrew word kahan, meaning to labor at a cause, to labor in a cause, to prophetically intercede between man and God. Israel becomes an intermediary agent in many ways for the sake of the nations of the world. In order to allow entry into the kingdom of God, it had to take place through the petitioning of the nation of Israel. Okay? One of their goals was to be a kingdom of priests to minister to the rest of the world, to bring the nations into the fold of God's covenantal program. Number 3, to reveal God's character through obedience and praise. Israel's faithfulness to the Torah was meant to demonstrate God's wisdom and justice. The nations would see Israel's laws and say, according to Dvarim, Deuteronomy 4:6-8, surely this is a great and wise and understanding people. Covenantal life was meant to attract the nations. Yehudah or Judah comes from the root yada, meaning to what? What are the Jewish people supposed to do? They are supposed to be praisers of God. The Jewish people are to lift up the sovereignty of God in praise. Yada means to praise. Number 4, how about to be a light to the nations? We read in Isaiah 49:3, he said to me, this is Adonai speaking to the prophet, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Isaiah 49:6b proclaims, so I will give you as a light, this is the nation of Israel, to the nations, so that you should be my salvation to the ends of the earth. This extends past moral example to actively revealing God's salvation. Point 5, to proclaim God's uniqueness, his aloneness. The Shema, we recite it every Shabbat. We really should be reciting it every day, right? It's a daily prayer. The Shema, Deuteronomy 6:4, Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, confronts the ancient Near East's hierarchical ranking of gods. God was coming in and telling the nation of Israel, when you are to inherit this land, you will have me and me alone. All of the surrounding nations had a plethora, a myriad of gods. Egypt had more than many of the other nations combined. And he says, I am the only God in heaven above. So we understand that the context of the Shema in Deuteronomy 6:4 is in many ways combating the culture of the time where God was working to destroy the hierarchical nature of the establishment of lowercase g gods in the surrounding nations. So the context of Echad and its extended word family are integral to understanding the Hebrew principle of Echad, which is one. So Echad comes from the root Achad. It means to unite oneself, highlighting the broad complexity of God's being and revealed character. It speaks specifically of multiple sharpened edges of a battle sword, and you can see the root Achad in Ezekiel 21:16 when God talks about the multi-angled nature of a sharpened sword of battle. You see, the Hebrew language is a pictorial language, and Rabbi talked about the shorashim, the roots. All Hebrew roots come from ancient Paleo-Hebrew pictures. They are all word pictures, okay? Very important for us to understand. So Echad comes from Achad, talks about the broad complexity, the multifaceted sharpened angles of a single sword. Yachad reflects the act of being joined or united together as one. For brothers to dwell together. You remember the song? Shevet Achim Gam Yachad. For brothers to dwell together in unity. Yachad. That is unity. That is a lot of people coming together into one single body made up of many people. That is how unity is displayed. So we have the many making one, one equals many. Okay. Another very important word is Yachid. Yachid is more of a mathematical one, emphasizing God's literal singularity and his uniqueness, his aloneness, the Lord alone. So there are some people that translate the Shema, the Lord our God, the Lord alone, because like myself, I genuinely believe that the context of Deuteronomy 6:4 is, again, breaking apart the hierarchical of the multifaceted nature of the lowercase g gods. So he is one as a plurality in the singular, but he is also the only mathematical one God, unique. He is God alone. There is no other God. So when we say, Mi kamocha, who is like you, we say, Ein kamocha, there is none like you. You are the only one. All right. A little bit more distant of a relative. Chadad is a cousin word. All the others are brother and sister words. So Chadad yet relates closely to the sword seen in Achad. It means to be sharpened. Achad is much more the noun of the sword itself. Chadad is much more of a verb, an action. It's the sharpening of the sword and connects with the multifaceted, complex unity, which is his singularity, his aloneness. This is a tremendous sod. Sod is Hebrew for mystery. One of the greatest mysteries of the Bible is the uniqueness, the aloneness, the echad of God, and how one is made up of many and many make up one. Now, that's not the stuff of this class, but that will be the subject of another. It's a fascinating subject, but it's in itself an entire class. All right. Exiting Egypt, the mixed multitude, the Erev Rav, as it's known in the Hebrew, as the judgment of God falls on Egypt, every house pays the price. Exodus Shmot 12:33. Now the Egyptians urged the people, sending them out of the land quickly, for they thought, we will all be dead. Where else have we heard that term? At the base of Mount Sinai, when God was coming down at Shavuot with fire, with cloud, and Moses was ascending, descending, and the people feared for their life, and they said, Moshe, make God stop. If this continues, we will all be dead. It's the same Hebrew that the Egyptians declared in the Torah. Get out of here. If you stay here, we will all die. They kicked them out, Exodus 12:33. We read that the Egyptians gave the children of Israel everything that they wanted. This is an extremely important principle. As Hebrew is cyclical in nature, we will see this revisited again. And I'm telling you that the nations will give the Jewish people everything in the end of days. It is prophesied in the prophets that the nations will give the people all of their treasures. We will see this revisited. And Exodus 12:37 and 38, Bnei Israel, the sons of Israel, journeyed from Ramses to Sukkot, 600,000 men on foot, as well as children. Also, the Erev Rav, a mixed multitude, went up with them along with the flocks, herds, and heavy livestock. So let's get into the Erev Rav a little bit, the mixed multitude. So Erev Rav in the modern Hebrew is a pejorative term. Basically, religious Jews have taken ownership of this word, and they will often refer to secular Jews or secular Israelis as Erev Rav, traitors to the nation. Okay, it's a pejorative today. It's basically saying, we are the Jews. You may be Jews ethnically, but spiritually, you are no different than the Egyptians. That's the Erev Rav. So Erev is also the word for Erev Tov. Good evening, good evening. So Erev, as it's symbolically, pictorially understood, it comes from the understanding of what in the English is the woof and the warp. Has anyone ever heard that term? It's the makeup of garmentry in ancient Israel. It's the cross-hatching of threads. And the woof and the warp came into biblical understanding as the high priest had to go and inspect the clothing of the Metzorah, the one that was afflicted with tzara'at on the outside of the camp. He had to inspect the woof and the warp, the cross-hatching, to ensure that no white spot affliction remained even in their garments before they were allowed to enter back into the camp. Okay? This is the mixed multitude. Rav, the Erev, comes from the cross-hatching of threads. Okay? And it's also the word for evening. All right, so what do we understand about evening? Genesis 1:5a. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. So it was evening. So what is evening? It's a cross-hatching of day and night. Okay? So darkness is the absence of light. Rabbi just mentioned that in a few Shabbatot ago. Evening is a blend of both light and darkness. Spiritually, it signifies neither hot nor cold, but rather a lukewarm, self-focused approach to God. The Erev Rav, the mixed multitude, was exactly a picture of this. Okay? Its makeup was a sizable contingency of foreigners, Egyptians amongst others, because remember, Egypt was the hub of the known world. Everybody did business. If you were anyone, you were doing business with Mitzrayim, with Egypt at that time. Okay? So the Erev Rav was a mixture of all sorts of people who left for many different reasons. They saw the writing on the wall as a decimated Egypt now held no future for them. Others saw the power of the God of Abraham and left after seeing his awesome display of plagues, wanting to end up on the right side of history. Others left for either criminal or nefarious reasons, and others for financial purposes, for business reasons. This was an opportunity for many to escape decimation and to enter into a whole new phase of business life in the midst of 1 million+ people. So you can see Erev, mixture, there was mixed motivation amongst the people as they exited with the Jewish people. And this worked to blend into the people, becoming a source often of, guess what? Spiritual discontent, seen in Numbers 11:4. Rebellion and challenging of Israel's identity. What do we see in Numbers 11:4? The Asaf Suf, which was an outworking of the Erev Rav, the mixed multitude. They are known as the grumblers. The Asaf Suf among them began to have cravings. So Bnei Israel began to wail repeatedly, saying, if we could just eat some meat. What happened with the meat? Well, eventually they had so much that it was coming out of their nostrils, proverbially speaking. But the grumblers, the Asaf Suf, which came from the mixed multitude, was a mixture of Israelites who were spiritually impacted by the foreigners who were in their midst. And they were kvetching and kvelling, and they were asking, God, you took us out here. We had watermelons over here. We had meat, we had birds, we had all these things. Now you brought us out here to die? The Asaf Suf was the foundation of the grumbling. Okay? And it was a mixture of Egyptians who had, and maybe other foreigners who had negative association and a mixed motivation amongst the Israelites. That is the idea of Erev, a mix of threads, a mix of light and darkness. Let's continue on with the mixed multitude. Knowing that the Erev Rav was of mixed motivation and heart intent, it's now easy to understand why specific distinctions were put in place by God as far as who could or could not partake of the Passover sacrifice. What did the nation of Israel leave Egypt to do? To celebrate a festival unto God, right? To worship him. At the heart of this escape was the first Pesach, okay? Below we see classifications that would become an integral part of Israel's social class for the next 1,500 years. So let's do a brief breakdown of Exodus chapter 12. It's very critical for us to understand the development of classifications amongst the peoples of the nations in the midst of the Jewish people. So who could not participate in the Passover Seder? The Nechar is the first and primary. The Nechar was an uncircumcised stranger. And all of these groups made up the Erev Rav, the mixture of people that left with the Israelites. This was a strictly business relationship. That was what was most common. They could not participate. Why would you guess they could not participate? God knew the heart of the people. He knew that their motivation for leaving was incorrect. They did not leave for spiritual reasons. They left for other purposes than that. So they could not participate. It was a strictly business relationship. The Toshav could not participate either. This was a temporary resident, one sojourning in a land where he or she is not naturalized, though still disconnected. So again, their heart and their motivation was disconnected from the heart of God. Their motivation wasn't there. They also could not celebrate the Pesach. Also, Exodus 12:45, the Sahir is a hired worker. They left perhaps not under their own volition, but still their heart intent was not there either. You cannot partake in the Passover sacrifice if your heart is not positioned in a holy place. No one is allowed to partake of the Passover if their heart is not pure and their motivation is not correct. Exodus chapter 12 lays the foundation for that requirement, and that's for all people. All right, so who could participate in the Pesach? Exodus 12:44, the Eved. Eved was a slave and a servant and a worshiper. Avadim is the plural. Eved is servant. Avadim is the plural, servants. They can participate, but they had to be circumcised. What did physical circumcision portray at that time? It was a physical outworking that was seen on the outside, and it was a portrayal of the inner reality, and it was God's covenant requirement for Abraham and all his sons. And if you wanted to participate in the covenantal program, you had to integrate into the family that was in the house. Okay, this was a requirement. If you are to partake in our things, you must be circumcised. That was the Eved. Now we have the Ger, a temporary inhabitant lacking inherited rights, but connected to the people's ways. Very important there. Distinguished even more than the others due to deep connection. After circumcision, same rules apply to them as they do for the native born. They were considered proselytes. Okay? So, Avraham in Genesis chapter 23:4, Avraham spoke to the sons of Chet. What did he do in the midst of the sons of Chet? What was he trying to accomplish? Remember, he was trying to secure a grave site for his beloved, now passed away wife. And he was a stranger and a sojourner in the land. So he says to the sons of Chet, I am an outsider, a toshav, and a sojourner, a ger. My heart intent and the motivation of my heart before you is pure. May I please have a place to bury my wife. I am an outsider as far as I relate to you. Okay? Among you, he says. So Avraham even had the ownership of those cultural classifications upon him. So now we have the Ezrach. The Ezrach is the native-born Israelite. Ezrach comes from the idea of a native tree shooting forth what? Shooting forth its roots. Rabbi talked about it yesterday. This is going to become a very critical principle to our understanding of the nation's relation to the Israelites, to the Jewish people. So an Ezrach, first and foremost, is a Hebrew for a native-born Israelite. But the core understanding of it is a native tree. Comes from the root zarach, which is to rise, and it's used of the sun, speaking specifically of the emanating of light from the sun and the casting forth and the shooting forth of rays and light to become a light to the surrounding cultures, regions, and peoples. So Ezrach, native born, comes from a tree that shoots forth roots into the ground. And it's also the sun that rises and provides light to the whole world, shooting forth its beams of light. Roots and light, two of the fundamental gifts and the requirements of Israel in the midst of the nations. Okay? So both tree and light. Revelation chapter 12, 1 through 2, a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She is pregnant, crying out in birth pains, in agony to give birth. And guess what happens? The sun is Yeshua, and he's whisked away. And what happens to the woman? She runs, she is taken to be harbored and protected for over 1,200 days. We're talking about the nation of Israel protected for a season by God from the anti-Messiah himself. So the woman is a representation, prophetically symbolic, of the nation of Israel, through whom came the Jewish Messiah, who is the sun that is whisked off, and they are protected. So you see again, the idea of the luminaries standing behind the nation of Israel is critical to our understanding. As you follow Jeremiah 31 on down, when you talk about the new covenant, what does God promise at the end of Jeremiah 31? As long as the moon and the stars remain in the heavens, so Israel will always be a people before me. The luminaries have a fundamental connection, an inseparable connection with the Jewish people. And you see it in the literal name of the Ezrach, who was the native born. All right, Zion. What is the calling of Zion? Isaiah 6, 2a through 3. This is speaking of Jerusalem, of the city of David. For behold, darkness covers the earth, and deep darkness the peoples. Nations will come to your light, kings to the brilliance of your rising. You see the word there? Zachecha, the root of which is zarach. The Ezrach, the tree, the casting of light from the sun. So in the same way that the people were commanded to be a light to the nation, so too the city of David and Jerusalem was positioned to be a light to the nations until the end of the age. Let's continue on. Let's talk about the Torah, the one Torah. So Exodus chapter 12, verse 41, the first time we talk about a Torah achat, which is a singular Torah for all peoples, one teaching for all peoples, relates contextually to the Passover Seder in Exodus chapter 12. It says the same Torah applies to the native as well as to the outsider who dwells among you. The same law. I've had people in the past ask me, and this is a strange thing because within normative Judaism, it's very unusual for non-Jews to participate in a Passover Seder. We understand, though, as we have been revealed the entirety of the scriptures, that the same Torah applies to all people, especially in the context of the Passover Seder. And I hope that you all understand that you are all an integral part of the Commonwealth of Israel. All of us are united in this calling. Amen? Amen. All right, let's continue. As you can see, the celebration of Pesach was an attainable practice in these times for non-native born, non-Jews. But there were requirements in place. Your motivation had to be proper. And that motivation was reflected in, especially obviously with males only, in the outward act of physical circumcision. It's now clear that the kavanah is a heart direction, heart intent, and overall national involvement of the person played a large part in how they would be classified amongst these groups. The natural conclusion is that a certain level of assimilation into Israelite society took place over the subsequent years. This was a reality. Many non-Jews were folded into the construct of the ethnic Jewish people. Okay? Many non-natives were slowly folded into the culture. Around 1140 BCE, were introduced to Ruth, who as a Moabitess would eventually become not just the great-grandmother of King David, but likewise a beautiful picture of God's desired association of the nations to Israel. I can't talk about Ruth enough. I'm telling you, she is such a beautiful figure. She would model for future generations, including today, likely influencing updates to the Exodus chapter 12 classes. So the nations joining closely by way of loan. How do we understand again the calling of Israel? Salvation would flow through the nations. And if you were to become a part of God's covenantal structure and program, you had to go through the people, adopt the mindset, adopt the culture, adopt the signs of the covenant, the heart motivation. It all had to be structurally aligned through the native born. It was part and parcel of the calling of the nation of Israel the world over. It's one of the reasons why God was angered so when his people let him down. At one point in Ezekiel, he actually tells Ezekiel that the surrounding nations have a greater level of piety and kavanah, heart intent, than his own people, that they acted more holy than Israel did. That is a terrible lament for our God to have to deal with. Ruth 1:16 through 17, she says to Naomi, "Do not plead with me to abandon you. I'm begging you. please, to turn back from following you. For where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May Adonai deal with me, and worse, if anything but death comes between me and you. Does the church the world over proclaim this today? Maybe some, of course. I'm not going to generalize that much, because there are millions of those who attend church the world over who love the nation of Israel and who walk out the calling of Ruth. But as a whole, is one of the primary focuses of the modern day Western church Naomi?
No.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
No.
Rabbi talked about supersessionism and replacement theology. It's not always overt, but it's very, very subtle. Very, very subtle. And it is insidious, and it is leaked into the roots of modern day Western Christendom for a very, very long time. Now, if all of the church today adopted Ruth 1:16 and 17, this world would change overnight. It would change overnight. So she says, if anything but death comes between you and I, do not plead with me to abandon you, she says. This text right here is a devastating sledgehammer to the notion of the rapture, and we'll get more into that here. She says, I am begging you that nothing separates me from you except for death. Okay, I'll digress. 400 years later, God speaks through Isaiah. Let not the foreigner, this is Isaiah 56, 3a, the Nechar, who has joined himself to Adonai, saying, Adonai will surely separate me from this people. Now, who's saying these? Earlier, it was Ruth begging through the Spirit of God to Naomi. Now, who's speaking? God is speaking through the prophet. Now, we understand that Ruth's cry was the cry of God. Do not let the foreigner even entertain for a second the notion that I would separate them from the people. Not even for a second. So if God will not separate the church from Israel, the Gentiles from Israel, why do we have this notion that we are going to let the Jewish people endure a second Holocaust and everyone else is whisked away to party with Jesus in the sky? God himself says it will never happen. First, it's Ruth. Now we understand the Spirit of God was speaking through Ruth. Never say, separate me from your people. I will die in the boxcar with you. And we'll talk about the Holocaust shortly. Note that the Nechar in Exodus 12:43 could not celebrate Pesach, but is now allowed to enter in. So we see the classifications have been reclassified. The terminology has changed over the hundreds of years. And the prophet continues. Internalize this text, I'm begging you. Own it. Isaiah 56, 6 and 7. Also the foreigners who join Lava, and we'll get into that word in a second, themselves to Adonai, because when you join yourself to the people, you join yourself to God. And when you join yourself to God, you join yourself to the people. This is a reality. To minister to him, all of you foreigners who join, and to love the name of Adonai and to be his servants, January 3rd, all who keep from profaning the Shabbat, all who keep from profaning the Shabbat and hold fast to my covenant to enter in classifications, these I will bring to my holy mountain and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house will be called the house of prayer for all nations, which requires a brand new temple and a reinstituted sacrificial system overseen by the prince of Ezekiel 40-48, who will reign in Jerusalem for 1,000 years. 1,000 years. Now, think about this. Who wants to be invited to God's holy hill, to worship in a temple as all peoples unified? All people. What does it necessitate? To enter into his covenantal program through his people, to understand the origin and the foundation of all things. These I will bring to my mountain and rejoice in the house of prayer. Let's talk about lava, to be joined closely, to borrow, to receive on a loan. Salvation has been granted as a gift by God through the agency of his people to proliferate like the roots that go into the soil and the sun that emanates the beams of light in the sky, to be a light to the nations. Yeshua says, I am the light of the world. At the end of his ministry, he passes that to his disciples. He says, you are the light of the world. Through the agency of the Jewish people, salvation was to go to the ends of the earth with his Torah, with his teachings. Lava means to borrow, to receive on a loan through the agency of his people. Now, what does God say to the nation of Israel in Deuteronomy 28:12? Deuteronomy, Dvarim, the book of words, was a repetition of the Torah by Moses to the new generation because the previous one died because of their disobedience. It was Moses' last effort to save the second generation. Adonai will open for you, if you do what he says, his good storehouse, the heavens, to give rain for your land in its season and to bless all the work of your hand. You will lend, lava, to many nations. If you obey me, through you, you will lend all good things, including salvation, to the ends of the earth. You will not borrow. Now, on the next class, we talk about the olive tree. Who is connected to who? You will lend. The unnatural grafts into the natural. You will never borrow. The natural does not graft into the unnatural. Do you understand? If the nation of Israel is walking in righteousness, holiness, and obedience, the nations will flock to her and graft themselves in. And we'll talk about that here very shortly. The nation of Israel was supposed to be a disseminator of God's light and salvation to the ends of the earth. They were not to borrow from the nations. But you see that when disobedience entered in, all of the plan went topsy-turvy, upside down. All right, we're continuing on. The nations, take us to your God. This is a very important principle for us to understand, especially as the days of the earth draw to an end and we enter into the Olam Hazeh, not the Olam Hazeh, but the Olam Haba, which is the world that is to come. All right, Isaiah 56:3, again, not the foreigner who has joined himself to Adonai say, Adonai will surely separate me from his people. So we see that the Nechal slowly became synonymous now with the Ger, whereas they were unique classifications in Exodus chapter 12. Now the two concepts are merging in that it described a person who was not just temporarily residing in the midst of God's people, but actively participating through the covenantal structure and practice. They were formerly alienated because of their paganism, their idolatry, their disassociation. Now they have been brought in and have been reconciled. Rav Shaul, Rabbi Paul, uses the same terminology while addressing the formerly idol-worshiping non-Jews of Colossae. We read in Colossians 1:21 through 22a, once you were alienated from God and hostile in your attitude by wicked deeds, but now he has reconciled you in Messiah's physical body through death. Does everyone understand that the region that Rabbi Paul was ministering to in Thessalonica and Colossae and Ephesus and Galatia, all in the Asia Minor area, was nothing less than a bastion of idolatry? It was the idol-worshiping hub of the time. Okay, it was the Egypt in many regards of the ancient times at that time. So as people were leaving the temple cults, and I don't want to get explicit because this is being recorded, but the reality is that these temple cults were salacious, to say the least. This was the heart of pagan idolatry under the Greco-Roman model of the time. Licentiousness, lasciviousness, and all the other L words. It was a terrible environment. So Rav Shaul was sharing the Hebraic good news of Yeshua's resurrection with all of these pagans. And they were coming to faith and filling these young communities that he was establishing in Asia Minor. So they were all formally disassociated because of their evil deeds. Now, through Yeshua's shed blood of the Lamb, you have been brought in. Formerly alienated, now reconciled. Zechariah 8:23. Thus says Adonai Tzvaot, in those days it will come to pass that 10 men of every language of the nations will grasp the corner of the garment of a Jew, saying, let us go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Again, it's another restoration of the Deuteronomy text where God says you will lend to the people, but you will never borrow from them. Everything comes through this filtration process that comes through the roots and the rays of sun. A source of life and a source of life. The blessing to the peoples. And interestingly, they're grabbing onto the kanaf, which is the corner of the prayer, the garment that Jewish males wore in ancient times. Today we see it in both a talit katan that you wear over as a vest, or a talit gadol, which is what Rabbi and I and others wear on Shabbat. It has the tzitzit, the knafot, the corners are wings in Hebrew. It represents the shadow of God's wings. The kanaf is a singular wing. When you hold on to the tzitzit, which symbolizes 613 commandments, there is something profound and special about it. And in this Zechariah 8 text, they grab onto the wing where those tzitzit are. They're grabbing onto the commandments. They're saying, we have heard that God is with you. Take us to him. And there is shelter. And the woman who had the issue of bleeding grabs the corner of Yeshua's garment, likely where the kanaf, the wing where he had his tzitzit. And he says, I felt power leave me. And it was through the commandments that she was healed. In the Torah, it says, if you do these things, you shall live through them. And of course, that life is culminated in the embodiment of Yeshua, who is the goal that the Torah aims for. Right? So that's Zechariah 8:23. Yeshua travels through Samaria, Shomron, and this is in Yochanan, John chapter 4, and addresses a woman confused about the proper place to offer sacrifices. Because you see, the Samaritans were socially disassociated from the Jewish people. The Jews looked terribly down on the Samaritans. They saw them as imposters. And there's a lot of feuding going on with the Samaritans. So, and they didn't associate with each other. The disciples were shocked that he spoke. She was shocked that he spoke to her. John chapter 4:22. No. Yeshua says, you worship that which you do not know. We worship that which we do know, for we are the lenders, not the borrowers. Salvation is from the Jews. Yeshua had to remind her that your place of sacrifice, it's not the proper place. You see, the Samaritans created another temple to offer sacrifices because they disputed that the proper place where God attached his name was in Jerusalem. So they went and established in Judea and Samaria another temple. Correct. But Yeshua says, what you do, you're not aware of what you're doing. You're not aware of the origin. We worship that which we do know because salvation comes from the Jews. So Yeshua, I'm sure, said it in a loving fashion, but he had to remind her of the origin of all things. Okay. First century classifications changed. By the first century, non-Jews were classified in the below category. Now we see the development of new classifications. So First century, we have idolaters, the pagans, generally all goyim, or idol-worshipping peoples of the nations. The ger and the toshav have now been both combined into a single group known as the ger toshav. These were foreigners, non-Jews living in the land of Israel who wanted actively to be saved. The requirements for them was the 7 Noahide laws of the time. They could become, if they wanted to be more integrally connected on a deeper level, they could become the ger hashair, the proselyte of the gate, known more commonly as the God-fearers. And the God-fearers were a very expansive group in first century Israel. So the requirements of the God-fearers was Noahide laws, Shabbat, dietary laws, and active maintenance of a synagogue discipleship. As these adherents bore sons, the sons would become circumcised, intimately aligning with the Jewish people, along with joining in certain practices, such as joining in with traditional prayers. Now, the ger hashair could become, if they so chose, the ger tzedek, which is proselyte of righteousness, and the rabbis required that they were to be treated as though they were an ezrach, a native-born Israelite. Requirements for the ger tzedek, all the requirements of the God-fearers, plus circumcision and immersion in water. With women, it was sacrifice and immersion in water. And also to pay an annual temple tax. Strict Torah observance was required because, again, they were as native-born. So, Acts chapter 13:26, Paul addresses 3 classifications of people in this text. Achim, brothers, he says, B'nai Avraham, sons of Abraham, and also you who fear God. His audience was a mixture of all of these people. It is to us the message of this salvation has been sent. So he's talking about the native-born, the brothers is the Ezrachim, native-born Jews. He's talking to the proselytes who were the first century converts to Judaism. They went all the way through with circumcision, immersion, and sacrifice. And he's also talking to the final group, which was the largest, most expansive group, which was the God-fearers. You who fear God, most fell into this category because, let's talk about the reality. Circumcision for a grown adult is not for the faint of heart. Historically speaking, most males chose to remain in the God-fearing group because the pain was too much for them to bear. Yeah, and at 8 days, the body is producing the most vitamin K possible for clotting. I presided over our son's Brit Milah in the hospital, and he cried for about 5 seconds. Done. A grown man, not 5 seconds. All right. So that's why, again, that's why. I'll digress, but just thinking about that makes me faint of heart. All right, let's continue. Cornelius, a God-fearer who put his faith into action. Unlikely that you'll find a better representation of a God-fearer in all of the scriptures than you do in Acts chapter 10 with the life of Cornelius. He was a elevated in position Roman centurion who had many men reporting to him, but still he chose to move away from the gods of Rome, of which there were many, and immerse himself in the covenantal foundation of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So he was a devout man with all his household. He gave tzedakah from the root tzedek, righteous, tzaddik, tzedek, righteousness shall you pursue. Tzedek, tirdof, it says in the Torah. Righteousness shall you pursue. Tzedakah, you can see every time you give your tithe, every time you give your alms to the poor, tithe to the congregation, to the community, he gave tzedakah, and in this context, he gave tzedakah, or alms in the English, to the Jewish poor. He gave generously to the people and prayed to God continually about, and I need for you to hang on to this here, the 9th hour of the day, he saw clearly in a vision an angel of God coming to him saying, Cornelius. He stared at him in terror and said, what is it, Lord? The angel said to him, your prayers and your tzedakah have gone up as a memorial offering before God.
That happens to be the hour that he normally gets me on.
You know, this late in the day? The ninth hour is late in the day. 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, it's 3 p.m.
Morning. When does
What?
day starts?
No. The ninth hour. All right.
Oh.
No, the ninth hour. I will maintain this. It's in the afternoon. It's 3 in the afternoon. And I'm building this around that. If I'm wrong, I'll eat my hat, which I have a couple of them.
The hour that Yeshua passed away?
Correct. Yeah. 3 in the afternoon. And I'll continue to build this. Let's continue here. So what significance does the ninth hour hold in Jewish prayer? In the first century Jewish reckoning, daylight was divided into 12 equal parts. The ninth hour therefore fell, and I'm maintaining this, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, also known as Ma'ariv, which was the development of the evening prayers, the time of the evening, the Bein Ha'arbaim, which is the in between the evenings, when the 14th of Nisan transitions into the 15th of Nisan. That was the time of the slaughtering of the lambs. Okay, so these prayers followed the time of the daily sacrifices. So let's talk about the ninth hour here. Mark 15, 34 and 37. At the ninth hour, Yeshua cried out, my God, Eli, Eli, in the Aramaic, my God, why have you forsaken me? And Yeshua uttered a loud cry and breathed his last, says. 1 Kings 18:36, Elijah's fire from heaven descended at the time of the evening sacrifice. Daniel 9:21, Daniel receives Gabriel's visit about the time of the evening sacrifice. Again, so we see contextually that a lot of amazing things, not just in the past, because I want you to separate yourself mentally and spiritually that these things only happen in ancient times. As we get closer to the end, God will continue to work these things out in our midst. And I believe signs, wonders, miracles, deliverances will come on an exponential, even more powerful level as we get closer and closer to the end. We will see a revisitation cyclically of all of these events of ancient times. So when we understand the times of the sacrifices and the prayers, understand the importance of these things, because as he's offering this at the ninth hour, he receives a visitation from the angel. So the times of the sacrifices and the times of the prayers are very, very important for us to understand. And I'll have a brief breakdown here shortly. So these texts present a pattern. Divine events and revelation have often taken place during the ninth hour prayer window. There's a reason and a rhyme for seasons and for times. God has put them in from time immemorial. They are just as active today as they will be in the end of days. It's critical for us to understand the importance of the cyclical Hebraic reality. The Greek understanding is linear. You have the tablets of Moses and you have the age of the cross, and we are traveling on a linear path. So the further you get to the cross, the closer you get to the cross, the further you get away from the commandments. That is not a Hebraic understanding. Biblical Hebraic understanding is everything repeats itself on a life cycle cyclically. So that which has taken place in days of old will have to repeat itself in the modern time. There are times, there are prophecies that require 2, even 3 fulfillments to come to their completion before the end of the age. Everything Hebraically has to be operated on cyclically. So we are cyclically heading back now to the beginning of all things, which is, what did Yeshua say to the criminal? Today you will see me in paradise. Pardes, Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. That's where the passionate relationship between God and man began. And that's where we will meet him once again in perfect relationship and intimacy. We are all headed back to our original place. All right. So we see clearly that Cornelius, through a high-ranking official, followed the Jewish protocol in relation to the requirements of the proselyte of the gate. His heart intent was rewarded by an angelic visitation. Who doesn't want to be visited by an angel? I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say that so quickly because he was in terror.
Most of them are.
Yeah, most of them
Yeah.
are.
Or
But let me,
trying to worship.
so fear not. But again, many times when you see someone coming to face with the glory of God, what happened with Yochanan, John, what happened with Ezekiel? They fell on the ground as though they were dead men. Remember Isaiah, living stones, this last Shabbat, when Isaiah 6, he says, I must cease to be. I cannot continue to be alive in the presence of such divine holiness. That is how I am undone in my flesh. I cannot continue to live in the presence of his holiness. That is the separation between our fallen nature as human beings and the holiness and the grandeur of God who resides in the throne in the unseen realm. So, Shacharit, 9 o'clock in the morning. Mincha is the afternoon prayers, or also coinciding with the times of the ancient afternoon sacrifices. In the Ma'ariv, which is the evening, the Erev, the time where the light slowly becomes day. That was the evening time. That was the time of the visitation that Cornelius had by the angel. So let's go back one line there. His heart intent was rewarded by an angelic visitation that changed the course of the early believing community. It was right around this time that Shimon, Peter, was sitting on top of the roof of the tanner's house when the sheet with unclean animals comes down, and God helps them to understand, you silly man, I'm not speaking about animals, because the first thing Shimon does is, I have never put anything unclean in my mouth, which alludes to the reality that Yeshua never, as the master, put anything unclean into his own mouth. So all the disciples ate biblically clean. They all ate kosher. A lot of the world hasn't come to terms with that reality, but that's the truth. He says, I'm talking to you about people. I have now expanded the bounds of my kingdom offering, and through the Messiah that came through the Jewish people, I will now save the entirety of the known world. You now can come into the fold. Okay. Shacharit, Mincha, and Ma'ariv.
And Peter was really shocked. He's like, wow, the same Holy Spirit that was in us is in the Gentiles.
And what happens when Shimon walks into the house of Cornelius? He says, I need for you to understand that these things are not done. And this will be sort of a foundational statement for the next class, because Rabbi talks about it all the time. Table fellowship was at the heart of this coming union between Jews and non-Jews. Very, very important. Okay. So first century Jewish attitude, and this isn't all of the Jewish attitude. These were certain groups within the groups. Now it's critical for you to understand that there were 5 classes of Pharisees in the first century. Did you know that? So within modern day Christianity, the Pharisees are very much looked down upon. People will often, if you're legalistic, what's the pejorative, right? Oh, you Pharisees, you legalists. That is a very common term, because the Pharisees have developed a very bad rap within our understanding of the Brit Chadashah, of the New Testament, the New Covenant, right? They're perceived as bad guys. The reality is that Paul, in the present, in Philippians, refers to himself as a Pharisee. He had the road to Damascus experience, and he still referred to himself in the present as a Pharisee. On the Jerusalem Council, in the book of Acts, Yaakov, James, Yeshua's own brother, who was the presiding president of it, had with him present Pharisees, still walking in that calling and that class, And they understood that Yeshua was the Messiah, and they gave his life for him, reborn according to the Spirit, but they maintained their Pharisaical class. So that opens up the reality that there were many types of Pharisees, and there were many types of heart motivations within the religious leadership of Israel at the time. So not all of them were bad people. Many of them were in the pockets of the Romans. Others wanted to live pious lives. So we need to understand that. All right, so first century Jewish attitude towards non-Jews. Gentiles pollute everything. This is in the Mishnah, Tractate Tehorot. They make all things unclean.
What is that? Talmud? Is that Tractate Tehorot?
Correct, in the Talmud, yeah.
Never read the Talmud.
Well, one of these days we'll have an explanatory class. But so I just want everyone to understand that the heart of much of Israel's Jewish leadership at the time was not overly friendly to the Goyim, to the peoples of the nations, because again, the peoples of the nations often represented idolatry, uncleanness, so to speak. All right, Gentiles are children of destruction. Not very nice, right? Doesn't make you feel very warm and fuzzy. Marrying a Gentile was a capital offense. Killing Gentiles counts as righteousness. Well, again, understand that these were certain people, certain groups, not all of them, okay? Do not sell or rent land to Gentiles. And again, we're speaking for the most part about non-religious Gentiles who were peoples of the nations, who are pagan. And also Gentiles have no share in the world to come. Oh, that one stings a lot. Okay? Gentiles who opposed Pharisaic teaching and authority, they were known as the Epicureans at the time.
Jews had already been through exile in Babylon. They
Correct.
had gotten in a lot of trouble for idolatry.
Correct. And assimilation.
So, yeah.
So you can begin to understand, though.
Yeah.
So understand that the nation of Israel, the land of Israel in the first century, was classified as a place that had 7 levels of holiness, the center of which was Jerusalem. The further you got away from Jerusalem, the less holy the ground was considered. So any Jew who exited the land and came into the land of Israel was required to do what? They had to kick the dust off of their feet, because it was taught in the first century that if you brought the dust, the physical dirt from another country into the land, you were adulterating the 7th layer of holiness you were polluting the land. So when Yeshua says that they do not receive you, kick the dust off your feet, what is he saying about that household? That household is no different than the Goyim, the surrounding idolatrous worshiping nations. That was how it was understood. Jerusalem was the first level of holiness, and it went all the way to level 7 as you got to the exterior. That's what was meant by kicking the dust off your feet. Do not let it pollute. Okay, nations, roles, and responsibilities. So Esther chapter 9, 2, 3. We're going to be reading part of the Megillah coming up here. Aren't you excited? Are we reading the whole thing? Okay, so it's not word for word, more than part. Who was the bad guy in the book of Esther? A collective sigh and a collective boo. So let's talk about the role of the nations. Jews assimilated in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus in order to lay hands on those seeking their harm. No one was able to stand against them, for fear of them had fallen on all the peoples. That same fear took place during the Torah, and it will also happen in the end of days again. Even all the administrators of the provinces, the officers and the governors, and those doing business with the king helped the Jews. For the dread of Mordecai had fallen on them. So now you begin to see this integral connection of the peoples of the nations to come to the aid of Israel in their time of need. This prophetically will play itself out continually, both in our modern day and in the days that are to come. Now, have we seen this before? This is the symbol of the righteous of the nations at Yad Vashem, which is Israel's Holocaust memorial in Jerusalem. This Hebrew around the globe here translates into whoever sustains one soul, it's as if he sustained the soul of the whole world. And I talked about this in our first Living Stones class. Think small when it comes to the gospel, when it comes to the mission that God has for you, your neighbors, your family, the elderly, the disenfranchised, the orphans, the children. Those are the most important things. If you save one life, you have saved the whole world. This is a core Jewish principle that really integrally connects with Tikkun Olam, which is the reparation of the world, repairing that which has been broken. So, and again, the righteous amongst the nations, this is in commemoration of Gentiles who gave of their lives for the sanctification of the name and for the preservation of God's chosen people. If they saved one Jew, they saved the whole Jewish people. There are many trees planted in the honor of the righteous of the nations at Yad Vashem. This is a picture of Irina Sendler, who was a Roman Catholic Polish nurse. She saved 2,500 Jews in her parishes. That is a tree in Jerusalem that is in honor of her. She saved more than one soul. She saved 2,500 souls. Oskar Schindler was a German industrialist, member of the Nazi Party. He worked to bribe party officials, very wealthy man, to allow him to employ Jews in his munitions factories, since he saved over 1,200 Jews. Corrie ten Boom, one of my favorites. She's a modern day Ruth, and I'm telling you, her seminal work of The Hiding Place should be required reading for everyone in the modern day Christian church today. Corrie ten Boom was a Ruth of her day, a Dutch watchmaker. She worked to save the lives of 800 Jews during World War II, along with countless of the disabled. Her memory lives on at Yad Vashem in an area reserved for the righteous of the nations. And again, if you haven't read The Hiding Place, put it at the top of your list. It's a phenomenal work. So you begin to see this is a grain of sand on a seashore of people amongst the nations, many of whom we don't even know their names, that gave their lives for the sanctification of God's name and for the preservation of his people. And all of them will be rewarded by God. I genuinely believe that. So one soul, we save the whole world.
Those 3 people saved 4,500 Jews.
And think about the lineage and the families that came from those 4,500 Jews. To save one is to save a genealogy tree all the way down the line. It's a phenomenal reality. And all who are not Jewish get to partake in that blessing. And we're going to connect on that here shortly. Deuteronomy 32:21. They have made me jealous with what is not God. Who has made him jealous? The Jewish people, right? With a people with what is not a God. They have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous, or the Hebrew is more accurately understood as angry. The Hebrew word, the root of it is red-faced. You become red-faced with anger. I can't believe he's doing that for these people. I thought he was our God. That's the anger. That's the jealousy. Okay. So I will make them jealous with those who are not a people. Who are not a people? Well, everyone who wasn't Jewish, all the peoples of the nations. And I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. So Rabbi Paul Midrashes, he interprets this text in Romans 11:11. He proclaims the following. I say then, they did not stumble as to fall. He's talking about his Jewish brethren. May it never be. But by their false step, salvation has come to the nations to provoke Israel to jealousy, to provoke Israel to anger. It was through this false step.
And it's
What the intent here was that this non-nation that would provoke Israel to jealousy would do it by their relationship with God.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, the longest recorded hatred in the history of mankind was the hatred versus Judeos Regens.
Yeah.
The history of the church against the Jewish people. It's hard to produced jealousy from what went on, including the Inquisition, including the words of Martin Luther, what should we do with the stand race the Jews, which Hitler used as a blueprint for the final solution.
Yeah.
So
It's one of the reasons why Bonhoeffer, as a German psychologist,
first they
he protected many of the Jews, but guess what? He was a Lutheran, and because of his Lutheran past, the council at Yad Vashem refused to allow a tree on the righteous of the nations for Bonhoeffer, who was a German doctor who stood against the Nazis, but he was a Lutheran, and they understood that Martin Luther was extremely anti-Semitic. Yeah.
writings. And to this day, the Reformed Church idolizes him and never mentions this problem
They probably
with
don't
this
even know it.
theology.
Probably don't even know it, Rob. But it has worked to some. They're so
There's
Jewish.
Oh, absolutely. And Romans 11 will be sort of a framework for class number 2. So we will be getting heavy into that as well. Let's talk about the nation's responsibility towards Israel. 5 brief points here. Acknowledging and protecting their covenant relationship with Israel. Very, very important. Responsible for observing the light of Israel, prompting them to recognize and worship the true God. Understanding the consequences of opposing Israel. Huge point here. Very, very big point. Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, Zechariah 12, verse 9, Jeremiah 30, 16. In 12:3 of Genesis, we see God wants to make a great nation of Abraham and bless the creation through him. In the same verse, we read that anyone who blesses him will be blessed, and curses will fall on those who choose the way of cursing him. Yet we find that curses you is a very weak translation of kalelcha in the Hebrew, the root of which is kalal, means to make light of. Anyone that makes light of you, I will make light of them. They will be lightweight in nature. If they work to diminish you as a people, as a character, and the character of the people, I will diminish them as people and their character. This is the nature of curse in the Kalal. To make light, to diminish in value, or to despise. God said, I will visit those things on them in like. I will make them light in weight. I will despise them. I will not value them. So if you despise the Jewish people, guess what? It's going to be a tough road for you to walk. You have to answer to the God of the Jewish people. That's a biblical reality. The prophets talk about it through and through. Number 4, supporting and protecting the Jewish people. Very, very important. We see it in Esther. We see it throughout the scriptures. Those who gave of themselves for the people will be rewarded. The fate of the nations is intrinsically tied with their treatment of Israel. I should have emboldened that, but please throw that down in your notes. How you treat Israel is how you will be treated. All right, so supporting and protecting the Jewish people, the fate of the nations is intrinsically tied with their treatment of Israel. 5, behave in such a way that honors God and brings the Jewish people back to God in Shuvah. Our behavior as a model in front of the Jewish people is so integrally important to God. I'm telling you, we need to honor the people, even if they do not believe in Yeshua. We don't know who will be around when Yeshua reveals himself to Israel, and they will weep for him as though he was a firstborn son. These are people who did not know him until that moment. Joseph's brother's eyes had to be opened in the moment. So never mentally or spiritually disconnect yourself with non-Yeshua believing Jews. The heart of God is to bring his people back home so that Israel can be saved. Don't be a judge and saying, oh, they don't believe, so they're not this and they're not that. Don't place yourself in that position. Work to continue the forward progress of the kingdom of God and bring salvation to the Jewish people. Model that. And if you are not Jewish and you are doing those things, God bless you. That is an amazing model that I hope more and more people around can come to an understanding of. And bring them back in tshuva, to cause them to turn back to God's ways, back to God, to a full turnaround. So the nations, the destiny among the chosen. Where are we going as a united people? I'd like to think we're all going to the same place, right? That'd be pretty strange if we were going to different places. Ezekiel 47:21 and 23, you are to divide this land, fundamental that everyone comes to terms with this, for yourselves to the tribes of Israel, so that you are to divide it by lot for an inheritance for you and for the Gerim, the outsiders who were formerly disassociated but now are associated. You enter into the covenantal land allotments with the Jewish people. Okay? The outsiders who dwell among you, whoever bears children among you, they will be to you like the Ezrach, the native born of Israel. They will be allotted inheritance along with you among the tribes of Israel. Oh, so all of a sudden, we're not raptured. The church isn't raptured at this point. They are inheriting land into now the fully understood boundaries, the original intent of the land of Israel. You see, while the land of Israel was a part of this world, under King Solomon, it was the largest and most expansive that it had ever been to this day. The boundaries expand to the rivers, all the way down south. The land of Israel, the way it was designed by God, is 5, 6, 7 times as large as it is now. And the land allotments will be shared with all of the peoples of the nations who had the pure heart intent, who align themselves with the people, align themselves with God, and live their life as though they were a native born. The church has to come to terms with this 1,000-year reign prophetic reality. This is the destiny of the church, to enter into land allotment inheritance with the Jewish people. In whatever tribe the outsider lives, all of a sudden now they're segregated by tribes as well. There you will give him his inheritance. It is a declaration of Adonai.
Not second-class citizens in this kingdom.
Yeah. Ul hagerim hagarim, the sojourners who dwelt. Same word. You who dwell as an outsider, you who traveled as an outsider. Abraham was the first one with this title. So those are the outsiders who dwell among you. And of course, the Ezrach, the native born, the rooted, the one from whom sunshine rays come. These are the principal groups. Jews, peoples of the nations, all going to the same place, to a revitalized Jerusalem, a revitalized temple, and inevitably a new Jerusalem descending. They will all, along with the Jewish people, enter through the gates that all have the names of the Hebrew tribes.
And all flesh.
Yeah. Amen. Revelation 21, 10 and 12. Then he carried me away by the Ruach. Who doesn't want to be carried away by the Ruach? A great and high mountain, and he showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. She had a great high wall with 12 gates, and above the gates, 12 angels. On the gates were inscribed the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. So what we see, an earthly reality of Jew and Gentile combined, you will enter into that on a heavenly level when the unseen becomes seen, and we enter into a place where no sun, no moon, no stars will be required, because Adonai will be its light, it says. And at that point, that's when the distinctions stop. Because remember, God says, as long as there is the moon, the sun, and the stars, the nation of Israel will always be a people before me. So after the 1,000 years, all physical distinctions leave, and all are literally a one new man held accountable by a holy God. That is what we are all destined for. And that is the end of that class today, folks.